The envelope from my insurance company came on a Tuesday in March. Explanation of benefits, it said. A routine document I usually glanced at and filed away. Except this time, the numbers didn't make sense. Patient, Amanda Torres. That was me. Date of service, November 12th, 2023. Procedure, laparoscopic cholecystectomy. Gallbladder removal. Billed amount, $42,000. I stared at the page. I still had my gallbladder. I'd never had that surgery. I kept reading. Date of service, January 8th, 2024. Procedure, arthroscopic knee surgery. Billed amount, $38,000. My knees were fine. I ran 3 miles every morning. Date of service, February 15th, 2024. Procedure, endoscopic sinus surgery. Billed amount, $47,000. I'd never had sinus problems in my life. $127,000 in procedures I had never received from a doctor I had worked for, trusted, and respected for 8 years. From Dr. Vincent Kowalski, the surgeon whose operating room I had worked in nearly every day since 2016, whose patients I scheduled, prepped, and cared for, whose procedures I knew intimately because I assisted in most of them. I was a surgical nurse. I knew every surgery that happened in that OR. And I knew with absolute certainty that I had never been Dr. Kowalski's patient. My name is Amanda Torres. I'm 36 years old. And this is the story of how I discovered that the surgeon I worked for was committing massive healthcare fraud, and how, as his most trusted nurse, I was the one person who could prove it. Before I tell you about what I found in those billing records, let me give you some context about Dr. Vincent Kowalski and how I ended up working for him. I became a registered nurse in 2012 after completing my degree at Seattle University. I spent 2 years working in general medical surgical units at Harborview Medical Center, learning the basics of patient care, medication administration, and the controlled chaos that defines hospital nursing. But I'd always been drawn to surgical nursing. There was something about the precision of the operating room that appealed to me, the sterile environment, the focused teamwork, the immediate and tangible results of surgical intervention. In 2014, I completed additional training in perioperative nursing and got certified as an operating room nurse. I took a position at Northwest Surgical Associates, a private surgical practice that operated out of Evergreen Medical Center. That's where I met Dr. Kowalski. He was 52 years old at the time, a general surgeon with over 20 years of experience. He specialized in laparoscopic procedures, minimally invasive surgeries that used small incisions and cameras to perform operations that once required large open incisions. Dr. Kowalski had an excellent reputation. Patients loved him because he had a warm bedside manner and took time to explain procedures in language they could understand. Other surgeons respected him because his technique was meticulous and his complication rates were low. I was assigned to his surgical team in March 2016, and we worked together almost immediately. In the operating room, Dr. Kowalski was calm, methodical, and focused. He treated his nurses and surgical techs with respect, valued our input, and created an environment where the team functioned smoothly. Over the next 8 years, I assisted Dr. Kowalski in hundreds of surgeries: gallbladder removals, hernia repairs, appendectomies, colon resections. I knew his preferences for instruments, his surgical techniques, his habits in the OR. I knew when he was having a good day and when he was tired. I knew which cases made him nervous and which ones he could do in his sleep. I knew his strengths as a surgeon and his limitations. We had a professional relationship built on trust and competence. He relied on me to anticipate his needs during surgery, to maintain sterile technique, to monitor patients closely, and to catch potential problems before they became complications. I took that responsibility seriously. In 8 years, I never had a major incident in Dr. Kowalski's OR. No wrong site surgeries, no retained instruments, no preventable complications. Dr. Kowalski told me once that I was the best surgical nurse he'd ever worked with, that he trusted me completely, that he couldn't imagine his practice without me. I believed him. That's why the insurance statement felt like a physical blow when I opened it. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the document over and over, trying to make sense of it. 3 major surgeries, all supposedly performed by Dr. Kowalski, all showing my name as the patient, all completely fabricated. The first surgery listed was a laparoscopic cholecystectomy, gallbladder removal, allegedly performed on November 12th. I remembered that date clearly. It was a Monday. I had worked a full shift in Dr. Kowalski's OR that day. We'd done 2 hernia repairs in the morning and a colonoscopy in the afternoon. I had not been a patient that day. I had been wearing scrubs, not a hospital gown. I had been assisting Dr. Kowalski, not lying on his operating table. The second surgery was arthroscopic knee surgery, allegedly performed on January 8th, 2024. I checked my calendar. January 8th had been my nephew's birthday. I'd taken the day off and driven to Portland to attend his party. I had photos from that day, me, smiling, standing next to my nephew as he blew out candles. My knees were fine. No surgery, no recovery, no medical intervention of any kind. The third surgery was endoscopic sinus surgery on February 15th, 2024. I pulled out my work schedule. February 15th was a Thursday. I had worked a 12-hour shift. We'd done 4 surgeries that day, including an emergency appendectomy that had kept us in the OR until after 7 p.m. I had not been a patient. I had never undergone any of these procedures. But someone had billed my insurance company as if I had. Someone had submitted claims for surgeries that never happened, using my name, my insurance information, my patient identity. And according to the billing records, that someone was Dr. Vincent Kowalski. I tried calling my insurance company the next morning. I explained the situation to the customer service representative. There had been a mistake. The procedures listed on my explanation of benefits were incorrect. I had never had these surgeries. The representative asked me to hold while she looked into it. When she came back on the line, she sounded confused. She said the claims had been properly submitted by Dr. Kowalski's billing office. They included procedure codes, diagnosis codes, dates of service. Everything appeared legitimate. I told her I was absolutely certain I had not received these procedures. I worked for Dr. Kowalski. I was his surgical nurse. If I had undergone surgery, I would know. The representative said she would flag my account for a fraud investigation. She gave me a case number and told me someone from the Special Investigations Unit would contact me within 2 weeks. I hung up feeling unsettled. A billing error would be one thing, a clerical mistake, a mistyped patient number, an accidental duplicate entry. Those things happened. But this wasn't a simple error. These were detailed, specific claims for complex surgical procedures. Someone had deliberately entered my information. Someone had selected procedure codes. Someone had created documentation to support these fraudulent claims. Someone had committed healthcare fraud using my identity. And the person who had submitted these claims was the surgeon I worked with every single day. I spent the rest of that day trying to focus on my work, but my mind kept returning to those billing records. During my lunch break, I sat in my car and called my best friend Jennifer, who was also a nurse at a different hospital. I explained what I had found. The fake surgeries on my insurance statement, the procedures I knew I had never received. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked if I was absolutely certain the procedures hadn't occurred. Could there have been some confusion? Some administrative mix-up? I told her there was no confusion. I remembered exactly where I had been on each of those dates. I had not been a patient. I had been working, or I had been off celebrating my nephew's birthday. There was no possibility I had undergone major surgery without remembering it. Jennifer asked what I was going to do. I said I didn't know yet, but I needed to understand what was happening before I made any decisions. She told me to be careful, that if this was really fraud, it was serious, that people who committed fraud didn't usually do it just once. There was probably more going on than I knew. Her words stayed with me. I went to work that afternoon for a scheduled surgery. Dr. Kowalski was already in the OR when I arrived, reviewing the patient's chart and preparing for a laparoscopic hernia repair. He greeted me the way he always did, asking about my morning, making small talk while we scrubbed in. I watched him carefully, looking for signs of guilt or nervousness, but he seemed completely normal, relaxed, professional, focused on the upcoming procedure. The surgery went smoothly. Dr. Kowalski's technique was as precise as ever. We worked together seamlessly, the way we had for 8 years. After the patient was transferred to recovery, I asked if I could speak with him privately. We went to his office, a small room adjacent to the surgical suite, filled with medical texts and patient files. I showed him the insurance statement. I explained what I had found, the 3 procedures listed, the dates, the billed amounts. I told him I had never received any of these surgeries. Dr. Kowalski took the document from me and studied it carefully. His expression showed what appeared to be genuine confusion. He said there must be a billing error, that his office manager, Lisa Brennan, handled all the insurance submissions, that sometimes codes got mixed up or patient information got entered incorrectly. He apologized for the inconvenience and promised to have Lisa look into it immediately. He assured me it would be corrected within a few days. I wanted to believe him. I wanted this to be a simple mistake that would be resolved with a phone call and a corrected claim. But something in his response bothered me. Dr. Kowalski was a careful, detail-oriented surgeon. In the operating room, he double-checked everything. Patient identity, surgical site, instrument counts. He never left anything to chance. And yet here, with a claim that I, his most trusted nurse, had received $127,000 worth of fake surgeries, he was dismissing it as a clerical error without any real concern. That didn't fit with the person I knew. I thanked him and left his office. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those claims, about the specificity of the procedures, about the fact that they were all surgeries Dr. Kowalski regularly performed. Gallbladder removal, knee arthroscopy, sinus surgery. These weren't random procedure codes. They were legitimate surgeries that Dr. Kowalski had the credentials and expertise to perform. Someone with medical knowledge had selected these codes. Someone who understood billing and insurance protocols. I thought about Lisa Brennan, Dr. Kowalski's office manager. She had worked for him for 12 years, handling everything from appointment scheduling to insurance billing. She was competent, organized, and trusted completely by Dr. Kowalski. Could she have made this kind of error? Could she have accidentally entered my information for 3 separate surgeries over a 4-month period? It seemed unlikely. But if it wasn't an error, that meant it was intentional. And if it was intentional, I needed to understand why. I lay awake until 3 in the morning, my mind racing through possibilities. Finally, I made a decision. I would investigate this myself, quietly, before making any accusations or reports. I needed to know if this was an isolated incident involving just my records, or if there was something larger happening. The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I accessed the billing system at Northwest Surgical Associates. As a surgical nurse, I had limited access to the practice management software. I could view patient schedules, surgical notes, and post-operative care instructions, but I didn't typically look at billing information. That was Lisa's domain. However, I did have login credentials, and the system didn't restrict me from viewing billing records if I navigated to them. I pulled up my own patient file first. There they were. 3 surgical claims, all submitted under Dr. Kowalski's provider number. Each claim included detailed procedure codes, diagnosis codes, and supporting documentation. The documentation was what caught my attention. For the gallbladder surgery, there was an operative report, a detailed description of the surgical procedure, written in medical terminology, describing how Dr. Kowalski had performed a laparoscopic cholecystectomy on Amanda Torres for acute cholecystitis. I read the report carefully. It described inserting trocars through small abdominal incisions, insufflating the abdomen with carbon dioxide to create working space, visualizing the gallbladder with a laparoscopic camera, carefully dissecting it free from surrounding structures and blood vessels, and removing it through a small incision. It was a competent, believable, operative report, the kind Dr. Kowalski wrote for every surgery, technical but clear, detailed but not excessive. Except this surgery had never happened. I checked the date again. November 12, 2023. I pulled up the OR schedule for that day. On November 12th, Dr. Kowalski had performed 2 surgeries, a hernia repair on a patient named Robert Hayes at 8 a.m., and a colonoscopy on a patient named Susan Park at 2 p.m. I had been present for both procedures. I had assisted Dr. Kowalski in both cases. There was no gallbladder surgery that day. The OR schedule showed no such procedure. The surgical log showed no such case, and yet someone had created an operative report claiming the surgery had occurred. Someone had fabricated medical documentation to support a fraudulent insurance claim. I felt sick. I checked the other 2 procedures, the knee arthroscopy allegedly performed on January 8th, the sinus surgery allegedly performed on February 15th. Both had operative reports. Both included detailed descriptions of surgical procedures, Both were written in Dr. Kowalski's distinctive style, thorough, precise, professional, and both were complete fabrications. On January 8th, I had been in Portland at my nephew's birthday party. The OR schedule showed that Dr. Kowalski hadn't performed any surgeries that day. He'd been off. On February 15th, I had worked a full shift. The OR schedule showed 4 surgeries that day, none of which were on me. Someone had created false operative reports for surgeries that never happened. Someone had submitted those reports to insurance companies as evidence to support fraudulent claims. Someone had stolen $127,000 from my insurance company using fake medical procedures. And the person who had done it was either Dr. Kowalski or someone working directly under his supervision. I sat at my desk in the nurse's station, staring at the computer screen, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I had a terrible thought. If Dr. Kowalski had done this to me, his most trusted employee, someone who would notice irregularities in his practice, how many other patients had he done this to? I started searching. I pulled up the billing records for other patients I recognized, people whose surgeries I had assisted with, people whose names I knew from the OR schedule. I started with Robert Hayes, the hernia patient from November 12th. According to the billing records, Robert had been treated for 3 procedures in the past 6 months. The hernia repair in November, which I knew was real because I'd assisted, a rotator cuff repair in December, and a knee arthroscopy in January. I pulled up the OR schedule for December and January. I searched for Robert Hayes' name. He wasn't scheduled for rotator cuff surgery in December. He wasn't scheduled for knee arthroscopy in January. But someone had billed his insurance for both procedures, and someone had created operative reports documenting surgeries that never occurred. I felt my hands shaking as I typed. I moved to the next patient, Susan Park, the colonoscopy patient from November. According to her billing records, she'd had 5 procedures in the past year. The colonoscopy in November, real? An upper endoscopy in August? I checked the schedule, and yes, that was real too. But there were 3 other procedures listed. A cataract surgery in September, a carpal tunnel release in October, a trigger finger release in December. None of those procedures appeared on the OR schedule. Dr. Kowalski didn't even perform ophthalmology procedures. He wasn't trained for cataract surgery. Yet someone had billed Susan Park's insurance for procedures she never received, including one that Dr. Kowalski wasn't even qualified to perform. I kept searching, my sense of dread growing with each patient file I opened. Thomas Lynn, scheduled for an appendectomy in July. Real surgery, I remembered it. Also billed for shoulder surgery in August and ankle surgery in October. Neither appeared on the schedule. Patricia Mendoza, scheduled for gallbladder removal in May, real, also billed for hysterectomy in June, and hernia repair in September. The hysterectomy definitely didn't happen. Dr. Kowalski didn't perform gynecological surgeries, and besides, I would have remembered preparing for a hysterectomy. Marcus Jefferson, carpal tunnel surgery in March, real. Also billed for rotator cuff repair in April, meniscus repair in June, and trigger finger release in August. None of the additional procedures appeared on the schedule. For each patient, the pattern was the same. 1 or 2 real procedures that I could verify from the OR schedule and my own memory. Then additional procedures that had been billed but never performed. The fraudulent procedures were always ones that Dr. Kowalski was qualified to perform. Nothing obviously outside his scope of practice that would raise immediate red flags with insurance companies, but they were procedures that never happened. I spent 3 hours that night going through records, working long after everyone else had left the office. By the time I was done, I had identified 43 patients who had been billed for procedures they never received, 43 patients whose insurance companies had been defrauded. For each one, I documented the discrepancy, the procedure that was billed, the date it allegedly occurred, what the OR schedule showed for that date. The total amount billed for these fake procedures was staggering, over $4.8 million. $4.8 million in fraudulent insurance claims over approximately 5 years. Dr. Vincent Kowalski, the respected surgeon I had worked for and trusted for 8 years, was running a massive healthcare fraud scheme. And I was the only person who could prove it, because I was the only person who knew exactly what happened in his operating room every single day. I printed out the records I had found and took them home. I spent that night organizing the information, creating a detailed spreadsheet that documented each fraudulent claim: patient name, date of alleged procedure, procedure code and description, billed amount, what the OR schedule actually showed for that date. For patients like Robert Hayes and Susan Park, I included notes about which procedures were real and which were fake. I wanted to be precise. This wasn't about exaggerating or making unfounded accusations. This was about documenting facts. I also pulled my own surgical logs, the detailed notes I kept for every procedure I assisted with. These logs included the patient's name, the procedure performed, the start and end times, any complications, and notes about equipment or techniques used.
My logs corroborated what the OR schedule showed. They were an independent record that proved which surgeries actually occurred.
With my logs, the OR schedule, and the fraudulent billing records, I had ironclad evidence. But having evidence was one thing. Deciding what to do with it was another. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the decision.
Dr. Kowalski was my employer. Reporting him would almost certainly end my job at Northwest Surgical Associates. Even if I had whistleblower protections, the practical reality was that I couldn't continue working for someone I had accused of massive fraud.
The other staff at the practice would be affected too. If Dr. Kowalski's practice shut down, they would lose their jobs. The medical assistants, the schedulers, the billing staff, people I worked with every day, people who had families to support. Was it fair to cost them their livelihoods? But then I thought about the patients. 43 people whose insurance had been billed for procedures they never received. Most of them probably had no idea. They trusted their doctor. They assumed that if their insurance company paid a claim, it must be legitimate. And what about future patients? If I stayed silent, the fraud would continue. More people would be victimized. More money would be stolen. I thought about my responsibility as a nurse. I had taken an oath to advocate for patients, to maintain ethical standards, to uphold the integrity of the healthcare profession. Could I really stay silent about massive fraud just to protect my job? I spent 3 days wrestling with the decision, barely sleeping, unable to focus on anything else. I called Jennifer again, told her what I had found. The 43 patients, the $4.8 million, the systematic pattern of fraud. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked what I thought I should do. I told her I didn't know, that I was afraid of the consequences, that I didn't want to destroy people's lives even if they had done something wrong. Jennifer said something that stayed with me. She said that Dr. Kowalski had already destroyed his own life by choosing to commit fraud, that I wouldn't be destroying anything. I would just be revealing what he had done. She said that if I stayed silent, I would become complicit, that knowing about fraud and doing nothing made me part of the problem. She was right. On the 4th day, I made my decision. I called the fraud hotline for my insurance company. My hands were shaking as I dialed. I almost hung up twice before someone answered. When the representative came on the line, I took a deep breath. I told them my name was Amanda Torres, that I was a surgical nurse, that I had received an explanation of benefits showing procedures I never had, and that I had discovered evidence of systematic healthcare fraud. The person on the other end of the line transferred me immediately to the Special Investigations Unit. I spoke with an investigator named Marcus Flynn. His voice was calm, professional, reassuring. He listened carefully as I explained what I had found. The fake procedures billed to my insurance. The pattern I had discovered when I cross-referenced billing records with surgical schedules. The 43 patients who had been billed for procedures they never received. Marcus asked if I had documentation. I told him I did. Detailed records showing the discrepancies between what was billed and what actually occurred. Surgical logs confirming which procedures were real. Spreadsheets organizing all the evidence. He asked if I was willing to provide that documentation and testify about what I knew. I said yes. My voice didn't shake when I said it. I felt calm, clear, like I had finally made the right choice after days of uncertainty. Marcus explained that what I was describing constituted healthcare fraud, which was a federal crime. If the evidence supported my allegations, the FBI would likely get involved. There would be an investigation. I might be called as a witness. My employment situation could become complicated. He also explained that federal law protected whistleblowers who reported healthcare fraud. If I faced retaliation for reporting this, I had legal recourse. And if the case resulted in recovery of fraudulently billed funds, I might be eligible for a whistleblower reward, typically between 15 and 30% of the amount recovered. I told him I wasn't reporting the fraud for money. I was doing it because it was the right thing to do. But it was good to know that there were protections in place. Marcus said he would open a formal investigation and that someone would contact me within a few days to collect my documentation and take a detailed statement. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot outside Northwest Surgical Associates, knowing that I had just set in motion something that couldn't be undone. I felt scared, but I also felt something else. Relief. I had done the right thing. Whatever happened next, I could live with myself. The investigation moved faster than I expected. 2 days after my call with Marcus Flynn, I received a call from an FBI agent named Rachel Diaz. She was assigned to the Healthcare Fraud Division of the Seattle Field Office and wanted to meet with me to review the evidence I had found. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Ballard, away from the hospital and anywhere I might be recognized by colleagues from Northwest Surgical Associates. I arrived early, ordered coffee I was too nervous to drink, and waited. Agent Diaz arrived exactly on time. She was in her mid-40s, dressed in a dark suit, carrying a leather briefcase. She had an air of competence and authority that immediately put me at ease. We found a quiet corner table. I had brought copies of everything I had compiled, the billing records, the OR schedules, my surgical logs, the spreadsheet showing each fraudulent claim. Agent Diaz reviewed the materials carefully, asking detailed questions as she went. She wanted to know how the billing system worked, who had access to it, how operative reports were created and submitted, how I could be absolutely certain that the procedures I had flagged hadn't occurred. I explained my role as Dr. Kowalski's primary surgical nurse, that I had been present for nearly every surgery he performed over the past 8 years, that I maintained detailed logs as part of my professional responsibilities, that I knew his schedule, his patients, his techniques intimately. I walked her through specific examples.
Robert Hayes, billed for a hernia repair. Real, eye assisted. Billed for rotator cuff surgery. Fake, never appeared on the schedule. I have no memory of it. Billed for knee arthroscopy. Fake, same pattern.
Susan Park, billed for a colonoscopy real, billed for an upper endoscopy real, billed for cataract surgery fake, and Dr. Kowalski doesn't even perform ophthalmology procedures. For each fraudulent claim, I could point to the OR schedule and show that no surgery had been performed on that date for that patient, and I could reference my surgical logs, which independently corroborated the schedule. Agent Diaz asked about the operative reports for the fake procedures. How detailed were they? Who wrote them? I showed her examples. The reports were thorough, professionally written, medically accurate in their descriptions of surgical technique. They read exactly like Dr. Kowalski's legitimate operative reports. That meant either Dr. Kowalski had written them himself, or someone with significant medical knowledge had written them in his style. Agent Diaz asked about Lisa Brennan, the office manager who handled billing. I explained that Lisa had worked for Dr. Kowalski for 12 years. She was responsible for submitting insurance claims, managing the billing system, handling payments and denials. She would have had to submit these fraudulent claims either because Dr. Kowalski told her to or because she was doing it independently. I told Agent Diaz that I didn't know for certain whether Lisa was complicit or whether she was following orders. But given the volume of fraudulent claims and the fact that they included detailed operative reports, it seemed likely that Dr. Kowalski was directly involved. Agent Diaz said the evidence I had provided was compelling. She asked if I was willing to continue working at Northwest Surgical Associates while the investigation proceeded to avoid alerting Dr. Kowalski that he was under investigation. The thought made me feel sick. Going back to work, assisting Dr. Kowalski in surgeries, pretending everything was normal while knowing that the FBI was building a case against him. But I understood why it was necessary. If Dr. Kowalski knew he was being investigated, he might destroy evidence, alter records, or flee. I told Agent Diaz I would do it. She thanked me for coming forward. She said the FBI would move quickly to gather additional evidence and prepare for potential arrests. She gave me her direct phone number and told me to call immediately if I noticed anything unusual or if I felt unsafe. We shook hands and she left. I sat alone at the coffee shop for another hour, drinking cold coffee, trying to prepare myself mentally for what was coming. Over the next 6 weeks, I went to work every day and assisted Dr. Kowalski in surgeries, all while knowing that the FBI was building a criminal case against him. It was the most surreal experience of my life. Every morning, I would scrub in and work alongside Dr. Kowalski, the same way I had for 8 years. We would discuss patient care, review surgical techniques, make small talk between cases. He seemed completely normal, relaxed, professional, confident. If he suspected anything, he showed no signs of it. Lisa Brennan was the same. She greeted me cheerfully every morning, handled scheduling without any visible stress, managed the office efficiently. She laughed at jokes, complained about insurance companies denying claims, talked about her weekend plans.
If either of them knew that an FBI investigation was underway, they were exceptional actors.
Meanwhile, Agent Diaz called me every few days with updates. The FBI had obtained subpoenas for Dr. Kowalski's bank records, billing records, and computer systems. They were working with insurance fraud investigators to trace the fraudulent payments and determine exactly how much money had been stolen. They had also begun contacting some of the defrauded patients to inform them that their insurance had been billed for procedures they never received. Many of the patients were shocked. Several became angry, feeling betrayed by a doctor they had trusted. The FBI was building a criminal case methodically, gathering evidence that would be strong enough to secure convictions. Agent Diaz told me they were planning to execute search warrants and make arrests within the next 2 weeks. She wanted to make sure I was prepared for what would happen. She explained that the arrests would likely take place at Dr. Kowalski's office during business hours. FBI agents would arrive with warrants to search the premises and seize evidence. Dr. Kowalski and potentially other staff members would be arrested. It would be dramatic, frightening, final. She asked if I wanted to be there when it happened, or if I preferred to call in sick that day. I thought about it. Part of me didn't want to see it, didn't want to watch Dr. Kowalski being led away in handcuffs. But another part of me felt like I needed to be there, to see this through to the end, to know that I had done the right thing. I told Agent Diaz I would be at work. The raid happened on May 15th, a Wednesday morning. I arrived at Northwest Surgical Associates at my usual time, 7 a.m. I was scheduled to assist with a gallbladder removal at 8:30. At 7:45, I was in the break room reviewing the patient's chart when I heard commotion in the front office.
Raised voices, the sound of many feet, the unmistakable authority of law enforcement commands.
I walked to the hallway and saw FBI agents entering the building. There were at least a dozen of them, wearing dark jackets with FBI printed in yellow letters. Some were carrying boxes, others had cameras and evidence bags. A uniformed police officer was stationed at the entrance, preventing anyone from leaving. Dr. Kowalski emerged from his office, looking confused. An FBI agent approached him, showed him a document, the search warrant, and spoke to him in a low voice. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I saw Dr. Kowalski's face change. The confusion turned to shock, then to fear. Another agent approached Lisa Brennan at the front desk. She was crying, her hands shaking, as the agent spoke to her. Within minutes, both Dr. Kowalski and Lisa were being handcuffed. Dr. Kowalski's eyes swept the hallway, looking for someone who could explain what was happening. His gaze landed on me. For a moment, we locked eyes. I don't know what he saw in my expression. Guilt, sadness, resolution. I don't know what I saw in his betrayal, realization, resignation. Then the agents led him away, and he was gone. I stood in the hallway, watching FBI agents swarm through the office. They were systematically going through every room, photographing everything, boxing up computers and files. Other staff members stood frozen, confused, frightened. One of the medical assistants was crying. The scheduler was on the phone, apparently trying to cancel the day's surgeries. Agent Diaz saw me in the hallway and walked over. She said the FBI had executed search warrants at Northwest Surgical Associates and at Dr. Kowalski's home. They had seized billing records, computer systems, financial documents, and other evidence related to the healthcare fraud investigation. Dr. Vincent Kowalski and Lisa Brennan had been arrested and charged with healthcare fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. They would be transported to the federal courthouse for initial appearances before a magistrate judge. Agent Diaz thanked me again for my cooperation. She said I would likely be contacted about testifying if the case went to trial. I asked what would happen to the practice. Agent Diaz said that was unclear. The investigation was ongoing. But for now, Northwest Surgical Associates was effectively shut down. No surgeries could be performed while the premises were being searched and evidence was being collected. I drove home in a daze. I had known this was coming. I had set it in motion. But seeing it actually happen, seeing Dr. Kowalski in handcuffs, seeing the FBI dismantling the practice where I had worked for 8 years was overwhelming. I felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory or vindication. Just a profound sadness that someone with so much talent and potential had destroyed his career, his reputation, and the lives of everyone who worked for him. I also felt afraid. What would happen to me now? Where would I work? Would other hospitals hire me after I had reported my employer for fraud? I spent the rest of that day and the next in my apartment, watching news coverage of the arrests. The local stations reported that a prominent Seattle surgeon had been arrested for allegedly defrauding insurance companies of nearly $5 million. The story included footage of FBI agents carrying boxes out of Northwest Surgical Associates and brief statements from the U.S. Attorney's Office about the seriousness of healthcare fraud. The reports didn't name me as the whistleblower, but they noted that the investigation had been initiated based on information provided by an employee who had discovered the fraud. Word traveled fast in the medical community. Within days, people knew that I had been Dr. Kowalski's primary surgical nurse. They could connect the dots. Some people called me to express support. Fellow nurses who said I had done the right thing, that healthcare fraud hurt everyone, that it took courage to come forward. Others were less supportive. One surgeon I barely knew left me a voicemail saying I had destroyed a good man's career over what were probably just billing errors. Another nurse sent me a text message saying I should have handled it privately instead of going to the FBI. The other staff from Northwest Surgical Associates were now unemployed. The practice had been shut down permanently. Lisa's assistant called me, angry and crying, saying I had cost her her job and asking how she was supposed to feed her kids. I understood her anger, but I also knew that I had done what was necessary. The fraud wouldn't have stopped on its own, and every day it continued. More insurance companies were being defrauded. More money was being stolen. I couldn't have lived with myself if I had stayed silent. Dr. Kowalski and Lisa Brennan were released on bail after their initial court appearances. Both were required to surrender their passports and were prohibited from having any contact with potential witnesses, which included me. Their defense attorneys issued statements saying their clients were innocent, that any billing irregularities were unintentional errors, and that they looked forward to clearing their names at trial. But the evidence against them was overwhelming. The FBI had recovered detailed financial records showing that over a 5-year period, Dr. Kowalski's practice had billed insurance companies for procedures that never occurred. The fraudulent billing had generated approximately $4.8 million in payments. Most of that money had been deposited into Dr. Kowalski's personal and business accounts. Some had been paid to Lisa Brennan as bonuses. Quarterly payments of $5,000 that coincided with periods of especially high fraudulent billing. The FBI had also recovered the fake operative reports from the practice's computer systems. Forensic analysis showed that the reports had been created by Dr. Kowalski using his login credentials and then uploaded to the billing system by Lisa.
The digital fingerprints were clear. Dr. Kowalski had written detailed, medically accurate descriptions of surgeries that never happened. Lisa had submitted the corresponding insurance claims. Together, they had executed a systematic fraud scheme.
In September, 6 months after the arrests, the case went to trial. Dr. Kowalski and Lisa Brennan both pled not guilty. Their defense strategy was to argue that any billing discrepancies were the result of administrative errors, not intentional fraud. They claimed that in a busy surgical practice, it was easy for records to get mixed up, for procedures to be miscoded, for clerical mistakes to occur. The prosecution's case was built on the evidence I had provided and my testimony about what actually occurred in Dr. Kowalski's operating room. I took the stand on the 3rd day of trial. The courtroom was packed. Media observers, other medical professionals, some of the defrauded patients. Dr. Kowalski sat at the defense table in a suit, looking smaller and older than I remembered. The prosecutor, an assistant U.S. attorney named Catherine Wallace, asked me to describe my role at Northwest Surgical Associates. I explained that I had been Dr. Kowalski's primary surgical nurse for 8 years, that I had assisted him in hundreds of procedures, that I maintained detailed logs of every surgery and knew his practice intimately. Catherine asked me how I had discovered the fraud. I described receiving the insurance statement showing procedures I had never received, how I had confronted Dr. Kowalski and been told it was a billing error, how I had accessed the billing system and discovered a pattern of fraudulent claims. Catherine walked me through specific examples. She showed me billing records for Robert Hayes, asked if I recognized his name. I said yes, he had been a patient of Dr. Kowalski's. She asked about the hernia repair billed in November 2023. I confirmed it was a real surgery that I had assisted with. She asked about the rotator cuff surgery billed in December 2023. I said it never occurred. Robert Hayes had not been scheduled for that procedure. It didn't appear on the OR schedule. I had no memory of it. It was fake. We went through patient after patient, procedure after procedure. For each one, I explained how I knew whether the surgery was real or fabricated. I referenced the OR schedule, my surgical logs, my personal knowledge of Dr. Kowalski's practice. Catherine asked me about the operative reports for the fake procedures. I explained that they were detailed, professionally written, medically accurate descriptions of surgical techniques. They read exactly like Dr. Kowalski's legitimate operative reports. She asked if someone without medical training could have written them. I said no. The reports demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of surgical anatomy and technique. They could only have been written by a trained surgeon. Catherine asked if I had any doubt that Dr. Kowalski had written the fake operative reports himself. I said I had no doubt. The writing style, the level of detail, the specific terminology, they were consistent with all of Dr. Kowalski's legitimate operative reports. The prosecutor concluded by asking me how certain I was that the procedures I had identified as fraudulent had never occurred. I looked directly at the jury. I said I was absolutely certain. I had been present for nearly every surgery Dr. Kowalski performed over 8 years. I maintained detailed logs. I knew his schedule, his patients, his techniques. When a procedure appeared in the billing records but not in the OR schedule or my surgical logs, and when I had no memory of preparing for or assisting with that procedure, I knew it hadn't happened. The defense attorney cross-examined me aggressively. His name was Michael Patterson, and he had a reputation for being a skilled trial lawyer. He tried every angle he could think of to undermine my credibility. He suggested I might have been mistaken about which procedures occurred, that in a busy surgical practice spanning 8 years, it was possible to lose track of specific cases or confuse dates. I replied that I didn't rely on memory alone. I had documentation, surgical logs that I maintained contemporaneously, or schedules that were created by the scheduling staff. These were independent records that corroborated each other. Patterson suggested I might have incomplete records, that perhaps some procedures had been performed but not logged properly. I explained that maintaining accurate surgical logs was a core professional responsibility, that incomplete logs would have been a serious breach of protocol, that in 8 years I had never failed to log a procedure. Patterson suggested I might have a personal grudge against Dr. Kowalski, that maybe I had been passed over for a promotion or had some other conflict that motivated me to fabricate allegations. I replied that I had worked productively with Dr. Kowalski for 8 years with no conflicts, that our professional relationship had been excellent until I discovered the fraudulent billing, that I had nothing to gain by making false accusations. In fact, I had lost my job as a result of coming forward. Patterson hammered on the whistleblower reward. He suggested I was motivated by the possibility of receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars if the government recovered fraudulent payments. I replied that I had not known about whistleblower rewards when I first reported the fraud, that money had not been my motivation, that I had come forward because I discovered evidence of systematic fraud and felt ethically obligated to report it. Patterson asked if I understood that my testimony was destroying Dr. Kowalski's career and reputation. I said yes, I understood. But I also understood that Dr. Kowalski had destroyed his own career by choosing to commit fraud for 5 years, that my testimony was simply describing what actually happened or didn't happen in his operating room. The cross-examination lasted over 3 hours. By the end, I was exhausted and emotionally drained. But I had told the truth. Every word of my testimony was accurate and supported by documentation. I believed that the jury could see that. Other witnesses testified as well over the following days. FBI agents described the evidence they had seized during the raids, the computer systems containing fake operative reports, the financial records showing millions of dollars in fraudulent billing, the patterns they had identified across hundreds of insurance claims. Forensic accountants explained how they had traced the money, how payments from insurance companies had been deposited into Dr. Kowalski's accounts, how Lisa Brennan had received quarterly bonuses that coincided with periods of high fraudulent billing. Insurance fraud investigators from several major insurance companies testified about their internal investigations. They explained how Dr. Kowalski's claims had initially seemed legitimate because they included proper procedure codes and supporting documentation. But once the FBI alerted them to the fraud, they had conducted audits and confirmed that many of the billed procedures never occurred. Several of the defrauded patients testified. Robert Hayes took the stand and described his shock when the FBI contacted him to say that his insurance had been billed for surgeries he never received. He said he had trusted Dr. Kowalski completely, that he felt betrayed and violated to learn his medical records had been falsified. Susan Park testified about receiving bills for procedures she knew she hadn't had. She said she had called Dr. Kowalski's office to report the error and had been assured it would be corrected, but it never was. The fraudulent billing continued. Marcus Jefferson described the impact of learning he had supposedly undergone multiple surgeries he had no memory of. He said it made him question his own sanity until the FBI explained what had happened. He said he would never trust a doctor the same way again. The testimony of the defrauded patients was emotionally powerful. These were real people whose trust had been violated, whose medical records had been falsified, whose insurance had been systematically defrauded. Then came Lisa Brennan's testimony. She had been offered a plea deal by the prosecution. If she testified truthfully about Dr. Kowalski's role in the fraud scheme and pled guilty to reduced charges, she would receive a significantly lighter sentence than if she went to trial and was convicted on all counts. Lisa took the deal. She took the stand looking pale and frightened. Her attorney sat next to her, and she kept glancing at him for reassurance. The prosecutor asked Lisa to describe her role at Northwest Surgical Associates. Lisa explained that she had been Dr. Kowalski's office manager for 12 years. She handled appointment scheduling, patient records, insurance billing, accounts payable and receivable. She was responsible for submitting insurance claims and following up on payments and denials. The prosecutor asked when she had first become aware of the fraudulent billing. Lisa said it had started about 5 years ago. Dr. Kowalski had called her into his office and explained that insurance companies were underpaying for procedures, that the reimbursement rates didn't adequately compensate for the time and expertise required. He had said that to make up for the inadequate payments, he was going to bill for some additional procedures that would generate fair compensation for his work. Lisa said she had understood immediately that what he was proposing was fraud, that billing for procedures that didn't occur was illegal, but she had been intimidated. Dr. Kowalski was her boss, she needed her job, she had 2 kids to support as a single mother, so she had agreed. The prosecutor asked Lisa to describe how the fraud scheme worked. Lisa explained that Dr. Kowalski would create fake operative reports for procedures that never occurred. He would write them himself using his personal knowledge of surgical techniques to make them believable. He would then upload the operative reports to the practice management system and instruct Lisa to submit the corresponding insurance claims. Lisa would generate the claims using the fake operative reports as supporting documentation. She would submit them to the insurance companies electronically. The insurance companies would process the claims and send payments which were deposited into Dr. Kowalski's business accounts. The prosecutor asked if Lisa had received any compensation for her participation. Lisa said yes. Dr. Kowalski had paid her quarterly bonuses of $5,000. He had called them performance bonuses, but she understood they were really compensation for her cooperation with the fraud scheme. Over 5 years, she had received approximately $100,000 in these bonuses. The prosecutor asked if Lisa had ever tried to stop the fraud or report it to authorities. Lisa started crying. She said she had known it was wrong, that she had felt guilty every time she submitted a fraudulent claim, but she had been afraid of losing her job and being prosecuted herself. She said she wished she had been brave enough to stop it, to refuse to participate, to report Dr. Kowalski. But she hadn't been brave. She had been complicit. The defense attorney cross-examined Lisa, trying to suggest that she had been the mastermind behind the fraud and was now blaming Dr. Kowalski to get a reduced sentence. But Lisa's testimony was consistent and detailed. She explained exactly how the scheme worked, who did what when it started. Her account was corroborated by the documentary evidence the FBI had seized. The jury clearly believed her. After 2 weeks of testimony, both sides rested their cases and presented closing arguments. The prosecution argued that the evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Kowalski had systematically defrauded insurance companies for 5 years, generating nearly $5 million in fraudulent payments. He had created fake operative reports, instructed his office manager to submit fraudulent claims, and paid her bonuses to ensure her cooperation. This wasn't a case of administrative errors or billing mistakes. It was deliberate, calculated fraud. The defense argued that Dr. Kowalski had believed he was appropriately billing for the value of his services, that the medical billing system was complex and confusing, that any errors were unintentional. But the defense couldn't explain the fake operative reports, couldn't explain why Dr. Kowalski had written detailed descriptions of surgeries that never occurred, couldn't explain the patterns of fraudulent billing that lasted for 5 years. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the foreperson announced that they had reached verdicts.
The judge asked them to announce their findings.
For Dr. Vincent Kowalski, guilty of healthcare fraud, guilty of wire fraud, guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty on all counts. For Lisa Brennan, guilty of healthcare fraud, guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud. She had pled guilty to these charges as part of her cooperation agreement, so there was no jury verdict for her. Her sentencing would come later. The courtroom was silent as the verdicts were read.
Dr. Kowalski sat motionless at the defense table, his face expressionless. His attorney put a hand on his shoulder.
Several of the defrauded patients who were present in the courtroom started crying. One woman whispered, "Thank God," loud enough for me to hear. I sat in the back of the courtroom, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't quite identify. Relief that justice had been served. Sadness that it had come to this. Exhaustion from the entire ordeal. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. The sentencing hearing took place in late November. The courtroom was less crowded than it had been during the trial. Just the attorneys, court staff, some media observers, a few of the defrauded patients, and me.
The judge began by noting the seriousness of the offenses.
Healthcare fraud, he said, undermined the integrity of the medical system. It betrayed the trust that patients placed in their doctors. It imposed costs on society through higher insurance premiums and reduced resources for legitimate medical care. Dr. Kowalski had violated his oath as a physician. He had exploited his position of trust for personal financial gain. He had created false medical records, which could have had serious consequences if future doctors had relied on them to make treatment decisions. The judge noted that Dr. Kowalski had shown no remorse throughout the investigation and trial. He had denied responsibility, blamed others, and refused to acknowledge the harm he had caused. The federal sentencing guidelines recommended a prison term of 10 to 12 years based on the amount of fraud and Dr. Kowalski's lack of acceptance of responsibility. The judge sentenced Dr. Kowalski to 12 years in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay restitution of $4.8 million to the defrauded insurance companies, the full amount that had been fraudulently billed. His medical license was permanently revoked by the state medical board. He would never practice medicine again. Dr. Kowalski stood as the sentence was read, his face pale but composed. He didn't react visibly, didn't cry or protest. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs to begin serving his sentence. Lisa Brennan was sentenced separately a week later. Because she had cooperated with the investigation, testified against Dr. Kowalski, and pled guilty, she received a significantly reduced sentence. 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She was ordered to pay restitution of $200,000, the amount she had received in bonuses for her participation in the fraud. Lisa cried throughout her sentencing hearing. She apologized to the patients who had been harmed. She said she wished she had been strong enough to refuse Dr. Kowalski's instructions and report the fraud when it started. The judge acknowledged her cooperation and remorse, but noted that she had participated in the fraud for 5 years, that she had submitted hundreds of fraudulent claims, that her actions had facilitated Dr. Kowalski's crimes. She bore responsibility for what had happened, even if Dr. Kowalski had been the architect of the scheme. After both sentencings were complete, I was contacted by the insurance company's legal departments. As a whistleblower under the False Claims Act and related federal healthcare fraud statutes, I was entitled to receive a percentage of the funds recovered as a result of my report. The insurance companies had recovered approximately $4.2 million of the fraudulently billed amount through restitution orders and asset seizures. Under the whistleblower reward provisions, I was entitled to receive between 15 and 30% of the recovery, depending on various factors, including the significance of my contribution to the case. The government determined that my contribution had been essential without my inside knowledge of Dr. Kowalski's practice and my detailed documentation of the fraudulent billing. The case would have been much more difficult to prove. I was awarded 22% of the $4.2 million recovery. The check was for $380,000. When I opened the envelope and saw the amount, I felt overwhelmed. It was more money than I had ever imagined having, more than I earned in several years as a nurse. I could pay off my student loans, buy a house, secure my financial future. But the money felt strange to me. I hadn't reported the fraud for financial gain. I had done it because it was the right thing to do.
Using the money just for myself felt wrong somehow?
I thought about it for several weeks, then I made a decision. I would use the money to create something meaningful, something that would help other healthcare professionals make ethical choices. I established the Amanda Torres Nursing Scholarship Fund. The scholarship would provide financial assistance to nursing students who demonstrated a commitment to ethical practice, patient advocacy, and professional integrity. Each year, the fund would award scholarships to students who wrote essays about ethical dilemmas in healthcare and how they would handle situations where they witnessed wrongdoing. I wanted to encourage a new generation of nurses to prioritize integrity over convenience, to speak up when they saw problems, to advocate for patients even when it was difficult.
The scholarship fund was my way of turning something terrible, Dr. Kowalski's fraud, into something positive.
I also kept some of the money for myself. I paid off my student loans, which had been hanging over me for years. I put a down payment on a small house. I established an emergency fund. For the first time in my adult life, I felt financially secure. But more importantly, I felt like I had done something meaningful with the whistleblower reward. I had used it to support the values that had motivated me to come forward in the first place. After the trial, I couldn't return to Northwest Surgical Associates. The practice had been permanently shut down as a result of the criminal investigation. I needed a new job. I was nervous about my employment prospects. Would other hospitals see me as a whistleblower and worry that I might report them for minor infractions? Would they question my loyalty? But those fears proved unfounded. I applied for a position at Swedish Medical Center, one of the largest hospital systems in Seattle. During my interview, I was honest about what had happened. I explained that I had worked for Dr. Kowalski, discovered systematic fraud, and reported it to federal authorities. The nursing director who interviewed me listened carefully. Then she said that Swedish Medical Center valued nurses who demonstrated ethical integrity and patient advocacy, that they wanted people who would speak up about problems rather than ignore them. She offered me the position on the spot. I started working at Swedish 2 months after Dr. Kowalski's sentencing. It was a fresh start in an environment that hadn't been tainted by fraud and betrayal. My new colleagues were welcoming and professional. Several of them told me privately that they respected what I had done, that it took courage to report a supervisor for wrongdoing, that healthcare needed more people who were willing to prioritize patients over personal convenience. One of the senior surgeons I worked with, Dr. Patricia Hayes, pulled me aside during my first week. She said she had followed the Kowalski case in the news, that she was glad I had come forward, that healthcare fraud was more common than most people realized, and that it took people like me to stop it. She said I should be proud of what I had done, not ashamed. Her words meant more to me than the whistleblower reward. They validated my decision in a way that money never could. Over time, I became an advocate for healthcare fraud prevention. I was invited to speak at nursing conferences about recognizing signs of fraud and the importance of reporting it. I consulted with insurance companies about how to improve their fraud detection systems. I worked with healthcare compliance organizations to develop training programs for medical professionals. I wanted to use my experience to prevent what happened with Dr. Kowalski from happening elsewhere, because the truth is, healthcare fraud is pervasive. It happens in private practices and large hospital systems. It involves doctors, nurses, billing specialists, and administrators. Sometimes it's blatant, completely fabricated procedures like Dr. Kowalski's scheme. Sometimes it's more subtle, upcoding procedures to get higher reimbursements, unbundling services to charge separately for things that should be billed together, performing unnecessary procedures just to generate revenue. All of it is wrong. All of it drives up healthcare costs and undermines trust in the medical system. And all of it requires healthcare professionals to have the courage to speak up when they see wrongdoing. I made it my mission to encourage that courage. The Amanda Torres Nursing Scholarship Fund has now provided assistance to 42 nursing students over the past several years, 42 future nurses who are entering the profession with a strong commitment to ethical practice and patient advocacy. That number feels significant to me because 43 was the number of patients whose insurance had been defrauded by Dr. Kowalski. For every patient whose trust was betrayed, there's now a nurse who has been trained and financially supported to prioritize integrity over convenience. That's justice, in its own way. Not perfect, not complete, but meaningful. Looking back on everything that happened, I don't regret my decision to report Dr. Kowalski. Yes, it cost me my job at Northwest Surgical Associates. Yes, it was emotionally difficult. Yes, it disrupted my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. But the alternative was unthinkable. I couldn't have looked at myself in the mirror knowing that I had discovered massive fraud and done nothing, that I had protected my job at the expense of patients and the integrity of the healthcare system. My ethical obligations as a nurse to advocate for patients, to maintain professional integrity, to uphold the standards of my profession required me to act. And I believe most healthcare professionals would do the same if they found themselves in my situation. We become nurses and doctors because we want to help people. We want to heal. We want to make lives better. When someone in our profession betrays that trust, when they exploit patients and the system for personal gain, it's our responsibility to stop them. Not because we're vindictive or seeking rewards, but because protecting patients is more important than any individual relationship or employment situation. The last time I thought about Dr. Kowalski was a few months ago. I was reading a medical journal article about healthcare fraud prevention. The article cited his case as a prime example of systematic billing fraud and discussed the importance of internal controls and whistleblower protections. The article noted that the Kowalski case had led to changes in how some insurance companies audit claims and verify procedures, that his fraud had been so extensive it had prompted systemic reforms. Something positive had emerged from something terrible. I wondered briefly what Dr. Kowalski was doing now. He's in federal prison, serving his 12-year sentence. He's probably in his mid-60s now. He'll be in his 70s when he's released. His medical career is over. His reputation destroyed. His freedom gone. I wondered if he had reflected on his choices, if he understood the harm he had caused to his patients, to his staff, to the healthcare system. I wondered if he thought about me, about the nurse who had trusted him, worked alongside him for 8 years, and ultimately reported him to federal authorities. I'll never know the answers to those questions, and that's okay. What matters is that the fraud was stopped, that justice was served, that patients were protected.
My name is Amanda Torres. I'm a surgical nurse, and I'm a whistleblower.
That last identity isn't something I ever expected or wanted, but it's become part of who I am. And I hope that by sharing this story, I can encourage others in healthcare to trust their instincts, document what they observe, and speak up when they discover wrongdoing. Because healthcare fraud doesn't just hurt insurance companies or government programs. It hurts all of us. It drives up costs. It undermines trust. It corrupts a system that should be focused on healing. Every time a healthcare professional stays silent about fraud, we all suffer. And every time someone has the courage to come forward, we all benefit. That's the real lesson of this story. Not that bad things happen, they do. People make terrible choices. They betray trust. They commit crimes. But good people can stop bad things. Courage matters. Integrity matters. And doing the right thing, even when it's hard, is always worth it. Always.